Hello everyone and welcome to this online recording which considers and gives advice on the use of questionnaires in your research project. No matter which stage you are in terms of a research project at Pearson College, if you're thinking about using questionnaires, then this is something that you can review in order to get some advice on how to put questionnaires together in terms of the type of questions, but also your different types of questionnaires that are out there. Now, a questionnaire generally is defined as a set of questions that are predetermined in a predetermined order. So I'm sure you've all used a questionnaire in the past. You've all been subject to a questionnaire or maybe even put one together. Here you're putting a list of questions together. Those questions are fixed and you're asking these people these questions and that's it. You don't ask any other questions. Remember, if you've been looking at interviews, there's something called a semi-structured interview and an in-depth interview. In-depth interviews are basically where you actually can ask different questions. You can change your questions. You can ask more questions. So it's much more flexible. Here with a questionnaire, you just set a number of questions, and those questions don't change. And you ask a range of people these questions, as many as possible. Okay, and they just stay the same, and you just record the responses. Now, there are two types of questionnaires. The first one is self-completed questionnaires. Now, these are questionnaires where you send them out and people fill them in themselves and send them back to you. Now, of course, you can send them out over the internet, over email, over web-based systems such as SurveyMonkey, and there's others around. You just need to search on Google for other kind of free survey-based online systems. You can send them out by post. You could also send them out and go and deliver them and collect them, sort of thing. So there's different ways of sending these things out, and we'll look at those later. But generally, people will complete themselves and send them back to you. Obviously, that could have an impact on the response rate. Now, response rate is the number of people that have completed your questionnaire. Okay, and we want that to be as high as possible. The other category is the interviewer completed route. Now, the interviewer completed route is very similar to what we've been talking about in terms of structured interviews. A structured interview is where you've got a list of questions. Those questions don't change, and you ask someone those questions, and you make a note of their responses. Okay, so very similar to a structured interview, and actually a structured interview can also be classed as a questionnaire. But the only thing you're doing is you're doing it face to face. You're asking people. You've got a clipboard. You've got 10 questions. You ask question 1, you make a note of their response. You ask question 2, you make a note of their response. A telephone questionnaire is as it is. You phone people up. You actually talk about you ask the question over the phone. You make a note of the response. The actual completion rate for interviewer completed questionnaires is slightly higher because you've got them captured. If you're just sending it out over email, sending it in the post, people just can tend to ignore it and put it in the bin. So that's the kind of pros and cons of those two different major routes. Don't worry about the terminology. A structured interview is simply a questionnaire that you ask face to face. It's simple as that. They overlap, so don't worry about getting that wrong. Don't worry about it at all. We understand, examiners understand that a structured interview is simply a questionnaire asked in a face-to-face situation. Again, completely up to you which route you choose, how you send it out, but that's what we're going to be discussing today, and also some of the pros and cons of questionnaires and the different types of questions that you can use, and also why you would use them. When to use a questionnaire? Well, the first thing to note is that a lot of you might be thinking about questionnaires, but also you might be thinking about interviews. Now, remember, when you're making a decision on the type of research method that you want to use for your research project, it's important always to think about the original problem, opportunity, or issue. Okay, very important, because you must select the research method that's going to help you with that problem, that opportunity, or issue that you've defined way back at the beginning, because that's the whole point of the project. You can't just randomly select different methods. You've got to select the methods that you think will help you get the data to answer these problems, opportunities, or issues. That's the whole point of the research project. When we're using a questionnaire, generally what we're doing is we're trying to understand a trend. a questionnaire is understanding what's actually happening in a situation. So I'll give an example. You might have a research project that's trying to understand the kind of trends in consumers buying a new smartphone. And you might ask the question is, what's the most important attribute when choosing a new smartphone? You get the results. 90% of people said the most important attribute when buying a new smartphone was battery life. Okay, that would be a trend. You've understood the trend. Okay, an interview is more looking at why that trend occurs. So an interview is about trying to understand, right, I understand the trend. I understand why 90% of, I understand the trend is 90% of people want a new a smartphone, but they want the battery life is really important to be long. But why is that? Why is that? And of course, you interview some consumers, you ask them, yeah, and they tell you the reasons why the battery life is important, and they'll probably give you some stories of why battery life is important to them in their daily life. And that's trying to understand why that trend exists. So if you're just trying to understand what's happening in the situation, what's the trend, questionnaires are really useful. If you're trying to understand why that trend's occurring, therefore you already understand the trend, obviously interviews are much better, because in interview, things like a semi-structured interview or an in-depth interview, you've got more flexibility, you've got a conversation going, you can add more questions, you can ask them to clarify questions, you can explore topics and issues that gets you an understanding of why they think like that. In a questionnaire, you haven't got the time. People put one-word answers, they put yes, no, they tick boxes. You know, a questionnaire is all about understanding just the trend. So always think back to, what am I trying to do with my research project? What's my issue? What's my opportunity? What's my problem? Am I just trying to understand what's happening here? Or am I trying to understand why it's happening? And of course, if it's what's happening, the trend, that would be more questionnaire based. If it's more why, then you're down more of the interview route, the in-depth and semi-structured interview route. So very important. And of course, if you are selecting a questionnaire, not a problem, but you must justify why it's the best route for you. Why is this method going to give you the best data for your research problem, your research objectives, and of course the whole basis of your topic, what you're trying to do. Now, just pause the recording for 5 to 10 minutes and consider, whether you should be using a questionnaire. Is it going to be useful? Are you trying to understand the trend or not? A questionnaire might be completely out of question. If so, then justify why it's out of the question. So pause here now, think about your research problem, think about your opportunity, and think about your issue, and think about, would a questionnaire help me, and why would it help me? Okay, and if a questionnaire doesn't help you, then why won't it help you? Because what's the nature of your problem, opportunity, issue? Are you thinking more about the why type questions? Does it lend itself more to interview? So pause 5 to 10 minutes, have a think. Is questionnaires going to be useful? A questionnaire is not going to be useful. What are the reasons for that decision? One of the big things with questionnaires is, remember, because you're trying to understand the trend, one of the big things with a questionnaire is trying to get a big response rate. A response rate is basically the number of people that responded to your questionnaire, the number of people that have completed it. Okay, so if I've sent out 100 questionnaires, I first need to say, who am I sending these questionnaires to in my research methodology? Is it students in the final year of their degree? Is it middle managers in Starbucks? Is it primary school teachers? Who is it you're trying to question, and why are they important to the problem, the opportunity, the issue? Okay, so first of all, you need to define the target. And why are they important to you in this research project? Why are these the most important people to actually question? Then you need to talk about how many questionnaires you're going to send out. The more the merrier is really the rule of thumb here. With a questionnaire, because you're generally trying to understand the trends that are happening in a context, a certain context, or a market, or an industry, or whatever it may be, you're trying to understand those trends. You want to make sure that you get a full picture of what's happening. If you just get 3 questionnaires filled in, well, the trend you find from those 3 questionnaires might be highly biased. So we need to maximize our response rate. You need to get a big response rate. Generally, response rates are set in percentages. So if I've sent out 100 questionnaires to all final year students at Pearson College, okay, and I got 50 of those questionnaires back, my response rate would be 50%. The response rate, the higher the better. That's what we need to be looking at. Now, if you're looking in your literature review, you might be reading journal articles, you might be reading research in your area, and actually they're using questionnaires and they're stating the response rate. You've got to try and achieve a better response rate than them if you can. That's the key, because you obviously, with all research, you are trying to further knowledge. You're trying to make a slight contribution. You are trying to do something a little bit different or a little bit better than what's previously happened. Because if you don't, then what's the point of doing it? You're just reinventing the wheel. So, the bigger the response rate, the better. But always quote the response rates that you're going to get in your research method chapter or section of your research project. Now, things that can help maximize a response rate are based on designing the questions carefully, about the layout of the questionnaire and the number of questions that you're using, and of course the explanation of the questions and how to fill the questionnaire in. I'm sure some of you have looked at questionnaires, you thought you don't know how to fill it in, you've got, if you can't answer this question, if it's no to this question, go to question 6, or there's complicated instructions. That's all problems with getting your response rate high. My recommendation to get a high response rate is to pilot test. A pilot test is basically you design a questionnaire and you try it on 10 people. You get them to fill it in, and then you ask them afterwards in a kind of an informal kind of interview type situation. What do you think about the questionnaire? Was it easy to fill in? Was there any problems with the questions? Did you not understand something? Get them to give you feedback on it, and then of course react to that feedback, redesign the questionnaire, and that hopefully will get your response rate up. If you're having problems with response rates, and this generally happens when you're looking at the self-completed questionnaire route. So if you're sending out questionnaires, you're expecting people to complete themselves. You're not going to complete them for them. You're not going to phone them up and ask them over the phone. You're not going to stop them in the street in a face-to-face interview, a structured interview style, and ask them the questions. If you're going to expect them to fill it in and send it back yourself, generally the response rates can be pretty low. Now, if you are getting low response rates, then you might have to revert to the interviewer completed route of the questionnaires. Here, you'll have to phone them up, or you'll have to go and see them, ask them the question on the questionnaire, and fill it in for them. That will hopefully up your response rates. As again, response rates are really important. You need to actually try to maximize them, because the whole point of a questionnaire is to understand trends. The more people you question, the more people that get back to you, the better the quality of your research, but also the better the understanding of the trend, and the less bias that will creep into the actual findings of your questionnaire. As I said, there's various types of questionnaires. There's also various types of way of sending them out, and that's something that we'll look at now. We can send out our questionnaires for people to complete online through email. We can send them out over web survey kind of systems such as SurveyMonkey, and there's various other ones you can use which are very low cost or even free. You could post them out. You could deliver them yourself and collect them up. You could telephone someone up, ask them the question on the questionnaire, you record the response. Or you could stop people in the street or wherever, and with a clipboard, and ask them the question on the questionnaire and fill it in for them. That's a face-to-face type of questionnaire. That is also the same as a structured interview. A structured interview is the same as a face-to-face questionnaire. It's the same thing. You've got a list of questions, they don't change, you don't add any more questions, and you just ask them the question and record the response. Again, there's an overlap here. It doesn't matter which term you use, face-to-face questionnaire or structured interview. Examiners know what that means, so no problem. You use the term that you feel you like and more appropriate. So we'll look at these now and look at some of the pitfalls and some of the problems and some of the advantages of these different ways of sending out these questionnaires. So the first one, if you're thinking about sending out by online or through email, then let's have a look at this one now. Now, the first point to make is that the confidence of getting the questionnaire to the right person is fairly high, but that does depend on whether you've got an accurate email address. Now, if you're going to send out online, or you're going to send out through an email or some web-based system such as SurveyMonkey, then you need to make sure you have a database or a list of emails that are accurate, and you've got those list of emails. You might not have that, so it might be difficult to do this. So having a list of emails is really important of the people you want to ask. If you have got these list of emails, they are accurate, then great. You've got confidence that the person will get this questionnaire and it's the right person. In other ways of sending out the questionnaires, it's not so high confidence. So we'll look at that in a bit. Generally, the textbooks say that the response rate is 10 to 30%. Okay, 10 would be on the low side, 30 would be a good response rate. Again, the higher the response rate, the better. So I encourage you to to encourage people to fill them in. The more they fill in, the better, because it helps give you more validity and reliability to results if you have a high response rate. One thing to bear in mind, if you are sending these things out, these things don't come back instantly. Some will, but some might take some time, and some might take some chasing as well. So, 2 to 6 weeks they're talking about in terms of sending these out and getting all the replies back. And you may have to chase them. So you just be wary of time, especially when you're planning your research project. Remember that once you get this data, you need to understand what it means, and that's what we call data analysis. And because all the data is already electronic, it's already filled in into forms, it makes it easier to analyze. You don't have to retype it into the computer. You don't have to retype it into Excel or SPSS, those kind of data analysis systems. So that's a time saving at least. It could have some financial implications. If you're sending email, it's fairly free. But if you're using some of these web-based systems, there may be some charges that you have to consider. One of the advantages of these online systems is that they tend to be you can have a large sample size, which is great because the larger the better. Remember, you're trying to understand a trend, therefore you're trying to understand a trend across a lot of people. If you have a small sample size, the actual trend or the findings might be very biased, so the larger the better. And of course, with email, you can send it across the world, so great for doing questionnaires in different countries, so fantastic that way. In terms of the recommended length of the questions and the number of questions, it does vary, and this is where you need to do pilot testing, because 10 questions might be okay, but 20 questions might be not okay and they don't fill it in. You might need to go down to 5 questions. It depends on what you're asking them, and it also depends on who you're asking. Different levels of education, different types of people who are very busy, might not tolerate 10 questions. It might have to be down to 5 or 6 questions. So that's what piloting will find out for you. It will work out whether whether the length is appropriate and whether people will complete it or they find it too long. And if it is too long, then you have to reduce it down a little bit to get your response rates up. Another way of sending out your questionnaire could be via the post, or you might be actually going to deliver them, drop them off, and collect them again once they're filled in. Now, with this, they talk about the confidence again that getting these questionnaires to the right people as being fairly low. Anyone could be filling these out. Wrong people could be filling them out. So, there is a bit of a risk there. But if you can, talk about how you got it to the right people, that's fine, not a problem. They say in the textbooks that the likely response rate for this is about for a questionnaire that's sent out by post or is being delivered and collected. It's about 30 to 50%. Now, if you've got a response rate of 50%, that would be really good. I suspect that's on the high side. So just be careful there, because these questionnaires can be put on tables, but do people fill them in? Probably not sometimes. So you've got to be careful there. So keep an eye on your response rate. If you need to up it, you might need to actually do a form of a face-to-face kind of questionnaire, fill it in, that kind of structured interview style to get your response rates up, or you might need to even do some telephoning around. Again, beware of the time. The completion rate on this I've said to be 4 to 8 weeks. Can be a problem, especially postal. It takes time putting it together. People are busy. Just be careful on that. In terms of data analysis, remember, you're sending this out. People are scribbling on your questionnaires. They're sending them back. You're going to have to input that into your computer to do the charts, do the graphs, all those kind of data analysis tools that we use to understand the trends, pie charts and all those kind of things. Can be time consuming because they've written it down. You need to transfer it to the computer. Whereas an email, it's already automated. The figures are already put in for you. So that's one of the disadvantages. Obviously, high financial implications. You're going to have to pay for postage. You're going to have to run around collecting these things and delivering them. So you need to be careful. Sample size tends to be quite a large geographical spread. Might not be fairly global because of the cost of postage, but you can get to a range of people in the UK. You can post these things into Europe and stuff like that. Depending on the costs, the spread is fairly good. It might not be as global and as easy and as big a reach and as cost-effective reach as email and online, because it's really cheap to send things across the world online. But it still can be fairly big in one country. In terms of recommended length, they do say 6 to 8 A4 pages. Now, that's quite long, in my opinion. So again, go back to the pilot testing. Will your target market, who you're trying to get these questionnaires filled in, will they stomach 6 to 8 pages, or does it need to be 1 page? Trial it. Think about the target market. Think about their lifestyle. Think about what they're doing. Think about the situation where they might be filling this in. Are they shopping? Are they busy at work? Are they sat at home having a cup of tea? What is it? Then you can design the length of the questionnaire around them. But again, I think that's a little bit high, 6 to 8. I would go for maybe 1, 2, or 3 pages of A4 at the very max, because we're getting in a society where we need to be very concise. We're all very busy, and if it's too long, people are probably not going to fill it in, and of course that will damage your response rates. So pilot it to see if the length is appropriate. If people are saying no, it's too long, then you need to shorten it down. But I would start with kind of 1, 2, or 3 pages of A4 questions. You could be doing this across the telephone. So you've done your questionnaire, you phone people up, and you've asked the question. You ask them the question on your questionnaire, and you fill it in for them. That's the telephone-based method. That's the interviewer completed route. Remember, at the very beginning. Again, getting the right person is really high here, because you're going to ask them, who is it? Are you such and such? You're going to make, are you in such and such position? You're going to make sure they're the target market for your questionnaire. So that's fine, not a problem with telephone interviewing. Response rates generally very high, because you've got them, you've captured them, 50 to 70%. So great, and that's really good, because remember, one of the big things with questionnaires is response rate. Get that higher the better, because it gives you more generalizability to the results. Generalizability, if you haven't come across it before, is making sure that your results are, or what your findings are from your research, can be generalizable across the consumers, across an industry, across a number of businesses. Is making sure that they are accurate and there's no bias in there. The more people you ask, the more the results are going to average out, and you're going to get a more accurate picture of what's happening. If you have a very low response rate, it could be quite biased to those very few people that you've got to complete your questionnaire. A good thing with telephone interviewing, because you grab people, they are fairly high actual response rates. Completion time and collection time, well, depends on the number of calls you can get through in a day, depends on your own schedule. So that's something that you need to factor into your planning. One thing with this is that when you're doing your data, recording the data and you're analyzing the data, again, you're going to be probably scribbling these answers to these questions down, or ticking the boxes for them. Again, you have to transfer them to the actual computer to do your analysis, to put your charts together, put your graphs together. Or you could record it, which would help you a lot, because you don't have to scribble things down. So if you're doing it on the phone, you could record it. Financial implications generally relates to the time needed to do this yourself. Phone lots of people up, answer all these questions, make a note of all their answers. Again, sample size could be global. You can phone anyone up through Skype or whatever and ask these questionnaires. Fine, not a problem. The recommended length is probably no more than 30 minutes for a questionnaire that you're going to ask someone over a telephone or over Skype or over video call, what it is. I think that's probably about appropriate. 30 minutes is about right, in considering the kind of the time people have nowadays. So yeah, I would go to around 30 minutes. But again, you can do a kind of pilot test. Certain people might stomach more than 30 minutes. They might go to an hour for you. But again, it does depend on the topic, it depends on the questions, but also it does heavily depend on the type of people you're interviewing and where you're actually going to question them. Is it in a busy lunch hour? Is it after work? How are you going to do it? So just be careful there. But 30 minutes is about right. You can also do your questionnaire through the face-to-face route, or This is also called the structured interview. This is where questionnaires and interviews overlap. Um, Here, basically, you've got a questionnaire. You've put a questionnaire together. Maybe it has 10 questions. And you basically ask people face to face the questions you've got in your questionnaire, and you fill in the responses that they give you for them. Again, confidence again the right people is high. Remember, you should all be defining who you should be asking. Is it primary school teachers? Is it managers on an income over 50,000? Who is it you're asking these questions to? That must be clearly defined. So you make sure you get those right people to start with before you go into this questionnaire. Again, the like response rate of these things are fairly high, 50 to 70%, because you've captured someone, and people generally feel obliged to complete the questionnaire when you've got them. So again, great way of getting your response rates up. The time needed to do this, again, can be quite time heavy, because you've got to do this. You've got to stand in front of someone and do this all the time. So you've got to invest time in this. So it can be quite lengthy. You've also got to record all the responses. You've got to transfer the responses to the computer to put them into the charts. So it can be a problem. You could record it, but generally, you've got the clipboard in front of you. You ask the question, you note down the answer, or you tick the box for them. So that's fine. Financial implications, well, it's your time, and of course travel. If you want to do a face-to-face questionnaire on the high street in Manchester, because you're looking at a research project that's based on Manchester shopping or something, then obviously if you don't live in Manchester, you've got to travel there, so you've got to be aware of that. Again, sample size can be great. You can go around the country and do this, not a problem. Again, face-to-face kind of questionnaires, or the other term, structured interviews, no more than 30 minutes is my recommendation. Maybe if you're stopping people on the street, you want to get it to about 20 minutes. But again, pilot it, get the feedback, see what people say. If they say it should be shorter, then make it shorter. It's better to have a low number of questions, but you have a high response rate, because you can then say, well, you've got more generalizability to your actual research. Okay, if you're thinking about questionnaires, then you may want to pause the recording now and think about how you're going to do it. How are you going to send them out? Who are the type of people that you want to be asking? Where are you going to find these people? Have you got emails for those people? Can you get emails from these people? So you need to think about, if you're using questionnaires, the best method of sending them out. Okay, or are you going to do it over the phone? Are you going to complete it for them? Are you going to stop them in the street and do a face-to-face type of questionnaire? Are you going to do it online? Think about the ways you're going to do it. Make a note, so you know which is the most appropriate, and say why. Really, again, with all these decisions that you're making, you've got to justify. Not only say how you did it, but justify. So if you're going to use email, then say why. Is it because you can get easy access to a lot of emails that relate to the people that you want to question? That's great, not a problem. It's convenient, and you are able to get the data readily, not a problem. So think about how you're going to send out your questionnaire based on what we've just been saying, but also say why that's the most appropriate or convenient. Pause the recording now, spend some time doing that. If not, then continue on. Moving on, there's various choices that you need to start making when you're looking at questionnaire design. The first one, as I've been talking about, is the profile and the characteristics of the people that you want to fill the questionnaire in. That's really important. Those people, the type of people that you want to fill in these questionnaires, need and should always relate to your problem, your opportunity, or your issue. If you've got a research project which is problems with motivation in, I don't know, Intel, for argument's sake, obviously that's staff motivation, so you need to be sending out the questionnaires to staff, not a problem. Fine, go ahead, but you need to define who they're going to. That's really important. The types of questions you're going to be asking, we'll look at that as well. The number of questions you should be asking, again, remember pilot testing is really important to determine the number of questions that are just about right, to make sure you get people completing these things and getting your response rate up. And of course, the number of people that you're going to be aiming at to start with. And that's linked to something called sampling. Now, there is also a recording on sampling to help you determine a sample size that you should be using. I'll leave sampling for the moment because it's a whole lecture in its own right, but you can't ask everyone. It's very impossible to ask everyone to complete your survey. It's just unrealistic. So we tend to get a sample, a number of people that are representative of the population, and that's the sample, and we send out the questionnaire to these people. At the minute, for this level, at the moment, before you look at the sampling lecture that's recorded, just think about the profile of the people you want to send this questionnaire out to. You're going to have to define this type of person and also say why these people are the best person or the most appropriate person to ask this questionnaire, to fill this question in for you, and how does it relate? How do they relate to your research problem, opportunity, or issue? Now, there's various types of questions you can put into a questionnaire, and we'll go through these now, and I'll give you some examples. So we've got an open question and closed questions. We've got list questions. We've got category questions, ranking questions, and scaling questions. So we'll look at these now, and again, this is up to you to put the questions together. My other advice in terms of questions is say why you asked certain questions. Why are you asking them if they're male or female? Why is that important? Why asking their age? Why is that important? So, you know, you don't ask questions for asking sake. You've got to have a reason for why you're asking this question. What is it trying to determine? What are you trying to find out here? That's important with a questionnaire. So let's look at the type of questions that we can actually use here, or you could think about using. So the first one's dead easy. Open versus closed questions. Now, this is an example of a closed question. A closed question is where you give them options. Okay, so this is a questionnaire question you've put together. How old are you? Okay, and there's the options, and simply they just have to tick the box. Now, you've got to say why you would asking them how old they are. Does it have a particular bearing on your research? You know, if you're asking about smartphones and the usage of smartphones, maybe age is important because you want to understand who's using a smartphone. Is anyone using a smartphone over 60? And if so, what do they think about buying a smartphone at that age? How does that differ to the people who answered your questionnaire who are less than 30? So age can be quite useful because you can say actually, you know, how does it relate? How do the results relate to the different ages of people that actually responded to my questionnaire? So again, this is an example of a closed question. You give them a question, they have a yes or no answer, or you give them some options and they just tick the most appropriate. An open question is where they can freely answer it. And again, bear in mind, with questionnaires, you're going to get one word or a very small sentence answer. And that's why I say questionnaires are very useful in determining trends. They're not very useful in understanding why those trends are apparent or why those trends are occurring. We tend to use interviews for understanding that, okay? Because we can question people. Why do you think like that? Why did you make that decision? And they can explain it. Questionnaires, people don't have time, they don't bother. So it's just understanding basic things. This is an example of an open question that you would use in the questionnaire. Please list up to 3 things you like about your new job. Pay, time off, people I work with. They could put things like that in their 3 options. So great, fine, no problem. And that gives you some data, but they're not going to put an essay down for you. That's a key, and that's why questionnaires are always used to understand just general trends, what's happening in a situation. You could use a list question. Now, a list question is where you basically give a list of options. Okay, very similar to closed questions, but here's one here. So, which service? This is a hotel. Which services would you like to see? Bed making, laundry, ironing, cleaning, other. On this one, there's also mixed in a bit of an open question to it as well, because if they don't particularly like all those options you've given them, they could put other there as well, and they can just put down something else, room service or something like that. So you can mix and match a little bit, and it all does depend on what you're trying to find out, the problem, the opportunity, the issue that you originally defined. You've also got category questions, which are a bit of an expansion, a bit more complex list questions. So you can see here, there's an example. Which of the following daily newspapers have you read during the past month? So they've got a list of new papers: Times, Express, Sun, The Mirror, and then you've got options. I've read it, I've not read it, or I don't know. So you can, it's kind of multiple lists or multiple categories that they can tick. Again, you can play with this. You know, you can just talk about in your research method that we've got a various mix between category questions, list questions, and open questions. And I've used this open question because I wanted to get more clarification. you just need to be able to just define the type of questioning you're using, and also why you're using that type of questioning. Rank questions could be something that's very useful, where people can put things in priority order. So here we've got, please number each of the factors listed in order of importance. Now this is a questionnaire where they're looking at trends in people buying new cars. And the instruction is, use a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being important and 5 being least important. Is acceleration important? Then they have to put 1 to 5. Boot size, economy size, price. Again, you're getting a bit more information on how people are thinking here and what the trend is. Do 90% of people put acceleration as being the most important factor when considering buying a new car? This kind of question would tell us that trend. So again, something you might want to consider when you're putting your questionnaire together. Scaling questions give us an understanding of the trends in people's attitudes and beliefs. So here we've got a question here. For the following statement, please tick one box which matches your view most closely. The question is, I feel that employees' views have influenced the decisions taken by management. I agree, I tend to agree, I disagree, or I tend to disagree. So they can just tick, how much they agree or disagree with that. So it gives them some understanding of the kind of trend in people's attitudes here. Again, if that's something that's appropriate to a research project, not a problem. Again, these are not set examples. You can change and vary. And of course, when you read the relevant chapter in any good research methods textbook, there'll be all sorts of other examples you can pick up on and use. If you are thinking about using a questionnaire and you've had some ideas from those examples, then please start jotting down the questions and the form of questions that you might want to use. Pause the recording now, put them together in terms of draft format. They could be a draft for your own pilot questionnaire that you could be testing on someone, or a few people. So pause now if you want to put some draft questions together based on what we've been talking about on those different types of questions. Moving on, in terms of, remember that response rate is really important, and the design of your question is quite important. And there's quite a lot of discussion and talk about questionnaire design in a lot of research textbooks. So it needs to be considered because it does affect your response rates and whether people just put these things in the bin or put them in the trash of their email box. So things we need to consider. The first advice is that there's some logical flow. Don't confuse people. Make sure it's a logical flow, that people can follow the line of questioning and what it's all about. And also, one of the biggest important things for you as a researcher is, are the questions you're asking, the people you're asking, the questions you're asking, is it relevant? Do you need them questions? What are you trying to find out? Is it going to help you with your research objectives? And is it going to help you with your original problem, opportunity, or issue? That's the most important thing here, is that don't just put random questions in there. Think about what you're trying to find out. Think of what you're trying to do in your research project, and ask the questions that are appropriate to that. And that's really important here. Use appropriate language. Don't use jargon or abbreviations, because they'll just bin it. They don't care, they won't care. They just, so don't do that. Make sure it's clear. Make sure the questions are clear and the instructions are clear as possible. And again, go back to the pilot testing. Put your set of questions together, try it on someone, let them read it and see if it makes sense and the instructions are clear. Because if it doesn't make sense, people aren't going to complete it and your response rate is going to be really low. Can the questions be more concise? Are they too long? Is it too long-winded? Again, writing these questions, you need to have a little practice. Pilot it. If people say question 6, too long-winded, then cut it down. Make it more concise. Make it clearer. Some questions, they might not know what it means. They're ambiguous. It's vague what you're asking them. It happens all the time. So pilot test it. Make sure you have a pilot test. Ask them these questions. Make sure these questions are clear. And also avoid bias. This is one important thing. For example, you may write a question. Here's a question here. Many people believe that too little money is spent on the NHS. Do you believe this is the case? Now, if you say that too little money is spent on the NHS, you're almost hinting that there is too little money spent on the NHS, and therefore you are hinting of a certain answer, and that can skew the results and provides bias. So make sure the actual questions are very objective. Now, what I mean by objective is what you would say here. Do you believe? Sorry. How many people believe too little money is spent on the NHS? That's the bias question. You'd probably want to say, what do you think about the amount of money spent on the NHS? Much more objective. You're not saying there's too much or too little money spent on the NHS. So try to be very clear but objective. Don't put bias into it that pushes them down a certain route, because that will skew the results and give you false readings from your results. And again, another example here. Is this the first time you've pretended to be sick? Heavily loaded question. And of course, people are going to say no to that. I've never pretended to be sick. They're just going to say no. I'm not. They're going to be actually probably quite offended by this type of questioning. So, you will probably would say, is this the first time that you have taken sick leave? Much more objective, avoids any possible bias, and of course, that's where you've got to be careful. So try to be objective as possible with your type of questions. And again, the way to work out that if it's objective or not is to actually test it, put a pilot test together, pilot questionnaire together, and try it on people, let people read it through and see what they say. Don't post questions that might be embarrassing. Things like income might be a problem. Things like if you're doing a face-to-face questionnaire, you're stopping people in the street, asking them their preferences, sexual preferences in terms of gay, bisexual, or straight. That could be, you wouldn't do that face to face. That would be very embarrassing. So don't embarrass people. Don't put them on the spot with sensitive questions. Be careful of that. And again, the pilot test will find that for you. Things like exact income. That's an example there. Make sure the instructions are clear. Again, pilot testing. Are questions grouped together in obvious sections? So this goes back to the actual flow of the questions, what you ask, number one, number two, how they flow together. Is a logical structure? Can they follow it? And does it make sense to the people that are answering this questionnaire? So consider that. And again, my biggest recommendation: pilot test, pilot test, pilot test. Make sure you get some feedback and you change the questionnaire so that you can increase the quality, increase the response rate, and avoid any kind of bias in those questions. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope that's been useful in terms of questionnaire. I know many of you will be using questionnaires, and that's some general advice. Generally, it's fairly straightforward. My biggest recommendation is pilot test your questionnaire. My second recommendation is to pick up any good research methods textbook and read the chapter on questionnaires to give you more examples of the different types of questions, the instructions that can be used, and that will help you put together your questionnaire. Hope it's been useful, and thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best with your research project.